Hi everybody. Well, it's been a while since I've been on this old girl. I think it's been about 3 weeks now. Even though if you looked at my videos I've posted, you wouldn't think so. Well, those were all shot back about 3 weeks ago. Been down in Atlanta, and the few times I've had a chance to get up here to ride, it's just been horrible weather. Very unusual for this part of the country. We've had very wet conditions, very cold conditions. In fact, we just had a good bit of snow in this area on Wednesday. This is actually on a Sunday, filming this, and it's just now kind of gotten away to where it's just not so bitterly cold. It's actually a pretty nice day today. I don't know, maybe just barely into the 50s. I'm not going to go for much of a ride, but I just had to get out here, and the bike needs gas anyway. So last time I rode it, I didn't go by the station and fill her up. I want to be sure and put some good go juice in her. But I did have a story to tell you today. I'm sure I've mentioned before that I was fortunate enough or determined enough to pursue getting my private pilot's license, and I did this back in the early 90s. And I went ahead and it took me a year, and I went ahead and got my license, and actually even owned my own little small airplane for about 4 years, and it just got to be too expensive, and I really wasn't using it enough to justify owning one. So I sold it and got out of it. But the story I wanted to tell you about was about my dad. And I've mentioned him before, and some of the stuff he did during World War II, and I may revisit that again and get into some more of that. But I want to tell you a story about him. Now, he was an older fella. He's gone now, but he was an older fella, and he was actually in college at North Carolina State University back in the mid-30s. That's 1930s, yes, right before World War II. And he was a dual major. He was taking engineering and aeronautical science. Flying was still so new then that aeronautical science was a up-and-coming field. I mean, you think about it, that was before World War II, so the big advances in aviation all occurred really as a result of World War II. We went to monoplanes and all-metal constructed airplanes, and airplanes capable of over 400 miles an hour, when before that they were all pretty much just wood and fabric. And 100, 150 miles an hour was a really fast one. But anyway, my dad always had this desire to fly. He, like me, he just always looked up in the sky and saw the birds, and in his case he'd see biplanes flying overhead and things like that, and he really wanted to learn to be a pilot. Back those days it wasn't very difficult. I had to have 40 hours of instruction minimum before I could even attempt to take my private pilot's test, and I don't know really how many I had. I think I had up in the probably high 50s, low 60s when I finally did take my test, and that's about typical for now. And it took a year to do that. Well, back in those days, they didn't really go about it the same way they do now, and you didn't have radios so much. You didn't have controlled airspace anywhere, and you really didn't even have any airports. You just had big open fields where they would fly these things out of. And so my dad was taking his instruction, and you only get about 4 hours. Back in those days, you only had about 4 hours or 5 hours of instruction before they put you in that plane and off you went. Now he was learning in a biplane, and I'm not sure what it was. My guess is it was probably a Jenny, which was a very popular trainer back then. And it was a biplane. It's wood and fabric. Most of them you see are bright yellow for, they say easy visibility in the air, but really I think it was easy visibility on the ground so they could find you when you went down somewhere. But there was a big airfield, and again, this is just a field, which is probably where the term came from, outside of Raleigh. And my mother at the time, who was, I'm not sure whether they were engaged or just dating, had come from Troy, North Carolina, and driven all the way up there to see my dad because it was his solo day. and he was going to get in the plane and go for, you know, go for his solo so he could get his license. Well, I don't know whether she got there a little late or really what the timeline was, but he wasn't anywhere around when she drove up, and just as she pulled in, two cadets, two people that were learning to fly in two different biplanes, hit in midair right in front of her, and they spun together to the ground, and right, just like I said, right in front of her. And I don't know whether anybody was killed. I don't know really what happened. Chances are they survived. Excuse me, because and I'll tell you why they probably did in a minute. But my father, of course, was on the field, knew my mother was coming, and to see the you know, to see him, and he said, "Oh my God, if she saw that, she will be frantic. She'll just know it's me." And so he hopped in his car and ran across and drove across the field real quick and found her and said, "It's not me, it's not me, everything's okay." And she told him that it was either that airplane or her, that she couldn't live with the thought of him coming down in an airplane just like she'd seen those people doing it. So right on the spot, he gave up his dream of ever wanting to fly. And it was interesting. But what I was going to tell you was the reason why I'm not so sure whether those guys were killed was because back in the old days when they used to carry the airmail, they used to use, they didn't have any instruments in these airplanes other than just a compass. And they didn't even have radio detection finders. A lot of them didn't even have radios. They would follow these big giant arrows, big concrete arrows that were actually built and placed across the country to mark the air routes so that the pilots could see these. They were painted white so they could see them from up in the air and know which direction he needed to go into his next target. Other than that, he'd have to come down and find a water tower outside of a town and find a name on it, try to look on his map and find it and figure out where he was, because navigation was really not all that great. Well, if any of them, you know, like I said, they didn't have instruments, and so some of these guys would get caught out at night. They'd get caught in the fog, or they'd get caught in up in the you know, above the cloud layer, and they would have to come down through the cloud. Well, you can't just drive the airplane down through the clouds, because if you lose, you know, your inner ear will mess you up, and you'll lose your orientation. You don't know what's up and down, and you'll get dizzy, and you'll actually run the risk of diving the airplane straight at the ground. And once you exceed the safe speed these things were designed for, or they were designed for back then, you could lose the wings or the tail, or you just fly straight into the ground and be killed instantly. But what they did, they had a little technique they would use. They would, up over the clouds, when they thought they knew where they were, they would put the plane intentionally into a flat spin, and it would just spin literally as the description. The plane would be flat, and it would just be spinning like a top coming down. And this sounds like madness, but really what it was, the plane will only flat spin down at a certain speed, and it's just barely enough to kill you if you hit something hard. And these guys would hope that they would spin down through the clouds in control because of the spin, and hopefully they would pop out through the bottom layer of the clouds before they hit the ground. Now, most of them did. Some of them didn't. If it was a foggy day or something, they were in the wrong place, they might hit some ground. But again, they were going vertically down at a much slower speed than if they'd been flying down. And a lot of these guys survived. But I thought that was an interesting story. I thought you might enjoy hearing that. But oh well, here to get some gas, so I'll log off for now. Talk to you guys in a little bit. Bye-bye.